Have you ever wondered what bizarre habits and obsessions people in the Victorian era had? From peculiar pastimes to peculiar possessions, the Victorians had a knack for the peculiar. Ever heard of photographing the dead or collecting hair jewelry? We're about to uncover the strangest addictions that once gripped the minds of the 19th century folks. Let's jump right into the madness. Grave robbing. In the Victorian times, when medicine was getting better, doctors needed fresh bodies to learn more. There were people called body snatchers who waited until families left the cemetery. They wanted to start their work before the bodies got too old. Doctors paid a lot of money for these fresh bodies to improve their knowledge of how our bodies work. It was a strange and kind of spooky part of history where doctors and these body snatchers had a secretive deal to help medical science move forward. Mummy unwrapping parties. During the Victorian era, it became a matter of social prestige to return from an Egyptian expedition not just with tales of pyramids and sphinxes, but with an actual mummy in tow. The allure of ancient Egypt gripped Victorian society so tightly that individuals considered it a symbol of sophistication to host elaborate gatherings upon their return. These peculiar soirees featured the unveiling of the acquired mummy, turning the unwrapping ceremony into the centerpiece of the event. Guests dressed in their finest attire gathered in eager anticipation to witness the revelation of the preserved remains. The air was filled with a curious mix of excitement and fascination as attendees marveled at the mummified vestiges of another time. These gatherings, blending a touch of the exotic with a dash of the macabre, reflected the eccentricities of Victorian England and its unorthodox social rituals. Eating weirdest animals alive. In the Victorian era, the culinary adventures of even Charles Darwin, the influential mind behind the theory of evolution, took an intriguing turn. Darwin shared a penchant for trying diverse and unconventional foods, aligning himself with clubs that embraced the bizarre in the realm of gastronomy. Notably, the Ichthyophagous Club made it their mission to savor the oddest sea creatures they could unearth, diving into the depths of the ocean's culinary offerings. On the other hand, Darwin's involvement with the Glutton Club reflected a broader approach. They weren't overly concerned about the specific identity of what they were consuming, as long as it presented a novel and distinct experience. It's a fascinating glimpse into Victorian culinary eccentricities, where the appetite for adventure and the thrill of sampling the unfamiliar took precedence over the particularities of the ingredients on the plate. Women wore entire birds on their head. In the Victorian era, taxidermy wasn't only a fascination for Walter Potter and his enthusiasts. Women across Europe and the USA embraced an unusual fashion trend by adorning their hats with strikingly bizarre taxidermized birds. Simply tucking a feather into their hats wasn't sufficient for these Victorian fashionistas. The demand for these eccentric accessories was so high that a conservationist estimated that up to 67 bird species were at risk of extinction because of this troubling trend. The pursuit of fashion inadvertently posed a threat to the avian population during this peculiar chapter in history. Photographing the dead. Back in Victorian times, when someone passed away, families did something quite unusual. Instead of just mourning, they dressed up their loved ones in their best clothes, made them look alive, and took pictures together. This strange practice, called post-mortem photography, was their way of keeping a memory of the person looking their finest. They carefully set up the scene to make it seem as if the person was still alive. While it was meant as a way to remember the departed, many folks today might find it a bit creepy or unsettling. These pictures show us how people back then dealt with grief in their own way. Use of arsenic by women. In today's world, the trend is all about getting that sun-kissed glow. But back in the Victorian era, people had a strikingly different notion of beauty. Victorian women went to great lengths to maintain a pale and fresh appearance. Their unusual beauty secret involved nibbling on chalk wafers laced with arsenic. Despite the high toxicity and addictive nature of arsenic, these women believed it was worth it because it gave their skin a coveted, porcelain-like whiteness. It's intriguing to observe how beauty standards have evolved over time. While contemporary preferences lean towards a sun-kissed complexion, Victorian women sought to emulate a more ethereal, almost fresh out of the coffin look. Horrifying face masks. If you think today's beauty stuff is a bit too much, brace yourself for this. In the past, there was this face mask made of rubber that looked like something Hannibal Lecter would wear. To use it, you'd smear some weird creams inside, put on the face glove, and spend the whole night sweating in it. Yep, that was a thing. People really went all out for beauty back then, doing things that sound pretty extreme compared to our simple skincare routines now. It's a reminder of how beauty trends have really changed over time. Collecting hair jewelry. In the Victorian era, collecting hair for sentimental jewelry was a surprisingly common and intricate practice. People cherished locks of hair from loved ones, whether living or deceased, as a tangible symbol of affection and connection. This hair, carefully woven and braided into intricate patterns, would then be fashioned into jewelry items like rings, bracelets, or brooches. These pieces served as deeply personal mementos, often exchanged between family members, friends, or lovers. The sentimental value attached to these hair-made treasures reflected the Victorian era's emphasis on emotions, remembrance, and the delicate intertwining of personal relationships in a tangible and wearable form. Living garden gnomes. In the eccentric landscape of Victorian hobbies, garden gnomes might seem peculiar, but for those with both wealth and a touch of madness, keeping an old man as a sort of pet was a trend that truly pushed the boundaries of eccentricity. These peculiar companions, known as hermits, were not merely for decoration, but lived amidst the nooks and crannies of opulent Victorian gardens. What's even more bizarre is that these hermits were forbidden from grooming themselves, adding an extra layer of peculiarities to their existence. Furthermore, their silence was enforced, as they were often not allowed to speak, turning them into living garden ornaments. This strange practice provides a glimpse into the whimsical and often bewildering hobbies that captivated the minds of certain affluent Victorians, transforming their gardens into both a display of wealth and an arena for the peculiar. Christmas cards. Christmas cards made their debut in the Victorian era, and while some resembled the familiar ones we receive today, others took a peculiar and eerie turn. Instead of the typical cheerful Santa Claus cards, people back then opted for bizarre alternatives featuring anthropomorphized insects or frogs. The choices were quite unconventional, to say the least. It seems the Victorians enjoyed a touch of weirdness in their holiday greetings. In a nod to this curious tradition, there might just be a few copies of these oddball cards finding their way to our friends and relatives this year. It's a playful nod to the quirkier side of Christmas card history. If you enjoyed this journey into the weird and wonderful habits of the Victorians, don't forget to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which addiction surprised you the most? See you in the next video.